Hello.
Hi. The first part will be covered by David, and he will introduce himself. He's from the HR Dept, and we've known each other for, I guess, for a year now. And so, yeah, over to you, David, and I will join the second part of the presentation.
Thank you, Farid. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share the presentation with you now. So there we are. Good morning, and thank you again. My name is David Hudson, and I am the owner director for the HR department in Clapham. And I'm delighted to join you today and to be with Farid to talk to you about the risks around taking on your first employee. Without further ado, let's move into it. So the objectives for us today are really driven by the needs of you guys, in actual fact, who have been asking us questions about the things to look out for when employing your first employee. So today we're looking to cover how you will find the right person and how to avoid the risks associated with that, the employment law risks, and Farid is going to talk us through the financial and tax implications relating to new employees and the costs of getting the new starter process wrong. So really, I think it's important just to say that hiring the right talent in the right way is probably one of the most important decisions that you as business owners and managers will make. Although we're obviously in a very difficult time at the moment in relation to COVID, we do know that if you look at some of the reports being circulated, we see that one of the top priorities for business owners this year is going to be increasing critical skills and making sure that the businesses are post-COVID ready. And the way to do that is going to be through proper recruitment. So we do expect a large uptake in recruitment this year. And critical to that is obviously having the right people in the right place at the right time. My experience is that if you get this right, if you hopefully follow through the things that we're going to talk to you about today, then you will get to the end of that, hopefully with a match made in heaven. But I also have experiences that where this is not done properly, it can be a match made in hell. So you really want to avoid that if you can. And we're hoping to provide that guidance to you today. Just to say that we are recording this webinar, so just to let you know that we aren't taking photographs either. So before we start, we appreciate that these things can be slightly one way. So we're looking to make it as interactive as possible. The first thing that we'd like you to do is to download what's called Participole. And Participole will just give us a bit of fun and audience participation where we have a number of questions through the presentation. So what you need to do, please, is take your mobile phone or your computer and go to the red URL, http://hrdeptclapham.participole.com. So give you a second just to tap that into whichever device you're using. And what you should get, and I'll hold that to my screen, is a screen that looks like that. So that's where you'll be. And I'll be asking you to share your thoughts with us through the presentation, and I'll tell you that that's through Participole. The other thing we're going to be doing is using the chat function. So do please land your questions there. Between Farid and I, we will cover those either during the presentation or at the end. And as I said, we'd like to make it as interactive as possible. And we will follow up with a copy of the slides and be in touch with you regarding what we can do to help you further. So without further ado, our first participle, which hopefully is going to work. And you should hopefully be seeing on your screen options for this. I'm not getting it on my phone. We've had some technical problems this morning, so okay, let's not play around with that. So what I'd like you to do is take to the chat function, and I'm interested to hear how much you've had experience of recruitment. So in the chat function, drop in one of these 4 letters, A, B, C, or D. So you've recruited before, you've never recruited, you've been trained, or you've never been trained. So we're just interested to see, first of all, what the range of experience is across the room. So, and don't be shy. Great, super, yeah, good. It's like Scrabble, isn't it, as I look at this chat? Great, thanks, Nino. Good, okay. Thanks, Julia. Yeah, good. So quite a number of people haven't been trained in how to properly recruit, which is usual. And I will say that this is one of the problems that you will often face with recruitment, is not knowing how to conduct the process correctly. So I guess these are really the things to start to be thinking about with your recruitment, and I'm going to talk through each one of those as we work through. But I will say that in my experience, and I've been in HR now for 20 plus years, my experience is that if you get the process right and you spend the time planning how you're approaching recruitment, then it will definitely pay dividends. And as I said, this is the basic way to do that. And I'm going to work through each part with you. So sounds easy so far, but what is the risk, you may be saying? And here it is, basically. The biggest risk with the recruitment and selection process is the risk of discrimination, both indirect discrimination and direct discrimination. And I want you to take away some really important principles from today. And the first is that the fundamental, rather, of good recruitment is that you are following a practice that's based on objectivity and fairness. So the protected characteristics that you see in front of you are enshrined within the Equality Act 2010 and are specifically enshrined so that there is no discrimination in terms of any one of these protected characteristics. And protected characteristic, just to be clear, is a fancy name for age or sex equality or gender reassignment. So this is really for you where the risks crystallize from a recruitment perspective. And I will be repeating this a number of times, and I won't apologize for that because I don't want you to inadvertently stumble into this territory. The key point here being that if you take nothing else away from this, what you cannot do is apply a criteria, so a rule or a view even, that you will not recruit based on one of these criteria. So for example, you cannot say that you won't recruit somebody that is a Christian. You can't say that you won't recruit somebody that is 53. And I'm sure thus you get the point. There is even within the Equality Act the principle of protection by association. So you cannot, for example, refuse to or make a decision on hiring somebody based on the very fact that they themselves have connection with somebody that has a protected characteristic. So it's very, very clear around what you cannot do. And apologies for that, for that language. But as I said, this is really where we see most of all employers come unstuck. So broadly speaking, as I said, the Equality Act will look to determine that you can't use indirect or direct discrimination within recruitment practices. And it's also important to understand that even though individuals that you encounter are not employees, your liability within the Equality Act still applies. So you don't get off scot-free just because people are not employees. So on that basis, let's take a look at the circles, the process that we talked about. And our aim here is to talk to you in brief about how you should be doing it, and in terms of risk, what you should be avoiding. So in terms of preparing for the recruitment, preparation is key. And I've said this, and I will repeat some of this just to drive some of these messages. And preparation should involve, for example, looking at the kind of person that you are wanting to take on in terms of skill set and the tasks and role that you want them to undertake. And also decide how you're going to recruit. And what I find with my clients is that often people feel that they have to recruit a full-timer, and that's not always going to be the case. What you can be doing is looking at things like employing an individual on a fixed term contract. You may want to look at part-time working, fixed term working. You might even want to look at sole trader or contractor agreements. All of those things will be potential routes to market. So I would suggest that you think about whether you're ready to take on the commitment that Fareed will talk about in a while around taking on a permanent employee. That being said, as you've gone through that thought process, what you don't want to do at this stage is rush the process and be closed-minded around who or what you need. And often the risk here is that you are looking, and I use the term generically, that you will be looking for often someone that may be like you, or maybe like somebody else within the office or within the work environment. And that can be limiting. That can be a limiting factor. What you really want to try and approach this process with is an open mind, because the diversity that comes from that means that you often find people you maybe didn't expect were right for your business, but actually will be perfect. So keep an open mind, because that's where the diversity element really begins to, is allowed then to flourish. Okay. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the advertising of the roles. Sorry, again, there's obviously a bit of a blip there on the right-hand side, but the way that you advertise, and I've used this rather fun advert on the left, will really not only determine who you are as the employer, but will also be one of the places, as I said, that you can fall foul of the equality legislation. So the point here to think about is, is the way that you're advertising promoting objectivity and openness and inclusivity? So what you don't want to be doing at this stage is applying direct criteria such as, we are looking for a female, which the advert on the right was showing, because that's direct discrimination. Or indeed, you want to think about adverts that might say, we are looking for somebody to work overtime on Saturdays and Sundays, because that may be indirect discrimination, i.e. you're potentially removing the opportunity for parents, single parents, women, for example, to apply for the role. So think carefully about how you are positioning the wording in your adverts. The other point with advertising to think about is, where are you advertising? So that with the social media situation as it is, obviously with COVID, people aren't out and about on the streets. They're maybe not picking up newspapers and magazines. So think about where you might want to target, who you might want to target. Some examples being Facebook groups, you know, like mum groups. I have some groups on my phone for Clapham mums who are always looking for people to help or for work, or the Nextdoor app, or any one of those that might just get you to reach further into potential candidate pools.
David, can I ask something? So these are extreme examples, of course, without naming, obviously, any organization. Have you come across any discrimination in the practice, and what kind of examples you've seen personally?
Yes, I have. Yes. So I have, and it's a while back, but I have come across a business who was looking for a receptionist, and the criteria in the advert said that that receptionist had to be female, and that the dress code was skirts and high heels. So a blatant example of that, and actually their dress code was even more discriminatory in terms of they expected their female receptionists to wear low-cut tops. So I think that's an age we've passed. I think what we do see is that employers are more unwittingly using discriminatory or indirect discriminatory language through lack of understanding more than through through choice, if you like.
I remember back in 2016 there was a receptionist who was working for PwC, and that's a public news, so I can mention that. So she was sent home because she wasn't wearing heels. That's, I guess, slightly maybe separate, that there was a whole scandal to do with that, and obviously they apologized later and removed that as a requirement.
Yeah, it's a very contentious area. It really is one that you have to, excuse the pun, tread through fairly carefully. So yeah, good example there, thank you. One of the things I do just want to add on this, that it is permissible within the Equality Act to target underrepresented or disadvantaged groups. And there are very limited circumstances that surround that. But just to say, you do sometimes see that. So another example of where it's permissible would be a women's refuge for battered women would be permitted to advertise for a female care worker. Because obviously within that environment, a male care worker would probably be inappropriate. But do talk to us, to Farida or I, if you want to get into that, because that is a tricky area, and the opportunity to do that legally is very limited.
David, then there's a question from one of the participants asking, what if we need a person to work only on the weekends?
Yeah, that is allowed. But you want to be thinking about not inadvertently excluding groups of people because of that. So you might want to think about shift works. Where it becomes indirectly discriminate is where you almost totally rule out a particular group. So working weekends is fine, and obviously retail workers will be an example of that, but or being advertised for that. But where you're saying you have to work weekends, early mornings and afternoons from 4 would potentially be ruling out working parents, for example. So you have to be a little bit careful.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, I think it's important for us to be realistic, and I'm sure you find this, Fareed, with finance legislation, that it's often difficult to translate absolute to real life. You know, sometimes the things don't go together. If we were to use a rule of thumb, it's important that when you're advertising, you're thinking about what you're doing, and that the requirement that you're advertising matches the needs of the job. That's the key part, and that there's no element of potential discrimination within that. That's where you can stop it becoming too complicated. Because frankly, you could keep thinking about this and never advertise because you become so frightened of tripping up on what could and couldn't be accepted or not. So, okay, thanks for that, Farid. I'm going to talk a bit about selection. So selection is where you've advertised, you've got your CVs come through, all good times. What you again need to do, that one of the key words you've heard us use is to have an objective way to decide who's the best fit, and to carefully check for gaps and inconsistencies. And where that really probably in practice works is that you want to have, for example, a checklist or someone else working with you that goes through that CV or that application and picks out the core requirements that you've set. It's very difficult if you're not doing that to be able to go back to a candidate and explain, well, I didn't choose you because. And I will say that, again, in my experience, where people are more aware of their rights in terms of the Equality Act, for example, the challenge of why they haven't been accepted is more and more present. And you need to be able to give people a good reason why you haven't, why you're not progressing their application. So the other point to think about here, and I will say this again, is to make sure that you're keeping an open mind about what is right for the business. And again, in reality, one CV is always going to be quite different to the other. So keep an open mind. Remember that sometimes taking on different skill sets really only benefits you because you're driving inclusion and diversity. And it's a well-known fact that if your business represents the diversity of your customers, then you're likely to be more successful because that relationship is likely to be stronger. Right, over to you then. So tell us in the chat, how do you interview candidates? So if I'm coming to you for a job, how do you interview me? Do you meet me in a coffee shop? Do you do it by phone? How do you do that? Farid, while that's going on, I think, was that Alexi's question that we've answered there?
Yes, yeah,
Great.
Yeah, we did.
Alexi, has that unconfused you? Do say. Okay, so for Lo, I'd go to her workplace. Lo is a great client of mine who makes cookie cutters, so her workplace would be very interesting to go to, I think.
We at Q Accountants we did a video interview first, and then in the past we would ask them to come to the office, but obviously in the current circumstances that's impossible.
Yeah.
We had a member of staff joining us, actually in fact a couple of members now. One of them joined in April when we were, I think it was pretty fresh when government stopped us, advised us not to go to work unless it's necessary, and she basically started working from home on the first day. And back in April, that was pretty weird. Now we had another members of staff who started recently, but that's kind of normal now.
Yeah, interesting. So just a comeback from Alexi. So a good challenge here. A bit worried about not being 100% honest on the job description. If the requirement is to work weekends, be 100% honest and say the requirement is to work weekends. But the point is that you don't inadvertently want to eliminate groups that might apply by the wording that you use. Now, let's be realistic. In real terms, it would be quite a stretch for a candidate to take a claim based on indirect discrimination of not being able to work weekends. So that's the kind of almost follow through, if you like, of that. So always be honest, Alexi. And if you're unsure or uncomfortable, talk to Farid or I, and we can help you with the wording of the advert itself. Again, hope that's clarified that for you, but do shout out Alexi, or alternatively, we can speak after. Okay, so it sounds like generally, if I was coming for a role with you, that you'd interview me in some way or another, which is brilliant news. the key here is always about conducting a structured interview, and I kind of focusing in, as you know, on this whole point around risk and the Equality Act. The very purpose of a structured interview is to avoid any suggestion that you've been discriminatory in your process, and it also, more importantly, more realistically, maybe gives people the chance to be assessed all on the same level playing field. Okay, and I will admit, and Farid may too, or not maybe, but that I've certainly conducted unstructured interviews, and you get to the end where you've seen 10 candidates because you've had a quick chat and think, oh my goodness, I really can't quite remember what they said, where I'm at, didn't take notes, and it becomes tough. Farid, you're nodding your head there. Obviously you've done the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. At the beginning, my first couple of hires, I was a big advocate of just having a chat with the person, and I still think it's a good thing, but it's maybe it's more for the final stage when you already have a few candidates that you've shortlisted.
Right. Yeah, good. The other things here to watch out for, so I'll just finish. The best practice dictates that you should have another person with you and that you take notes, because to that point, at least you've got something to reference back to. The other interesting, if any amongst us are more interested in the psychology of interviewing, there's some interesting situations where bias applies. So as human beings, we are prone to bias. That's just a natural, almost inbuilt situation, i.e., if I see a dinosaur running towards me, my bias is probably that I don't like dinosaurs and I'll run the other way. Okay, so that's where that comes from. In the much more civilized surround of an interview, bias can be things like what they call horns and halo. So, quick example. I had a great chat with Farid last night and chatted about my water polo passion, and that was amazing. Farid talked a bit about it, asked me lots of questions. Well, in a interview situation, I might think, do you know what an amazing guy. I really want to take him on because he's really interested in what I have to say. Yeah, that's referred to as the horns effect, i.e. there is a connection between us and it biases my view potentially of his capability to do the job. Sorry, that's halo. Horns might be if that conversation with Farid last night went the other way and I said, oh, I'm into water polo, and Farid says, I just couldn't care, and actually that is ridiculous. No one plays water polo. Do you do that with horses? Because it's got the word polo in it, and it went south. Well, I could well think, do you know what? He's never going to work for me. And that's the horns effect. So it's a little bit of kind of extremity, but my message here is we do all have biases, and you have to manage those biases and not allow them to creep into the decision-making process. Other quick point here that, again, the Equality Act rightly kind of talks about explicitly is that you may have disabled candidates that will want to apply, and that's that has to be encouraged and welcomed, and you cannot discriminate on that basis, as you're obviously picking up. But you may need to make what they call suitable adjustments. So thinking about where you're interviewing. So if a wheelchair user wants to interview and your office is usually on the 4th floor, then clearly that may be a problem. So make sure you're thinking about, for example, in that case, the accessibility of the interview. And I would be saying to you in real terms, find somewhere that you can meet that candidate that makes it so much easier for them to, to participate. In terms of the no-nos, what you can't do is ask personal or intrusive questions. And a very typical example here in my experience is, are you going to start a family? Probably is the #1 intrusive question that people will, in my experience, ask, or or other iterations. I'm not going to kind of pretend. I've heard hundreds, frankly, but just make sure that you're not straying into those sections The right to not have those questions asked is enshrined in the Equality Act. And finally, unlike your experience with me at the moment, what you mustn't do is talk too much. And it's so staggering that the number of interviews I observe whereby interviewers will spend all of their time talking and give the candidate very little time to speak. Quick rule of thumb here, you should be speaking a maximum of 20% of the time, maximum 20%. If you are speaking more than that, then you either think far too much of yourself and are showcasing, or you're not quite right for the role of recruiter. Either way, you need to rein it in. Okay, so we thought we'd share a couple of quick do's and don'ts on the interview questions. The questions in red are the don'ts, if you like. The ones in greens are the do's. The difference here, as you look at them, will be what? So let's throw that out into the chat. So my question to you is, as you look at these questions, what do you think determines the green questions from the red questions? So pop a quick response in the chat and tell me what you think. So Alexi, as we're just doing that, good question from Alexi there about personal or intrusive questions. So the maternity question will be one. Are you getting married? Has been another. Goodness, there's so many. I have experienced one actually that's on one of those questions. So do you have to wear that headscarf? Where clearly the individual is, is wearing religious dress. I've heard very almost combative questions. So we can't take you on if you, if you don't wear low cut tops. That was one I'd heard earlier on in my career. So it really is anything that is, and again, my counsel here is don't overthink it. If you are about to ask a question that you think might be personal or intrusive, quite frankly, don't ask it. It's a great response there from Jack, thank you. And you're right. The green questions are open questions, so there's no inference, if you like. And they are what we would technically call competency-based questions. So you're asking something very specific, and there's no element of potential discrimination that can follow as a result. And there you go. The red ones are probably more loaded, and some of which as I've just said, I've experienced. Okay.
So David,
yeah,
we have a question in the Q&A asking, can you ask questions that may relate to the role, for example, about them having children? We do a lot of work with nurseries and moms. Good question. You can ask that question, yeah. What you want to make sure is that you're not using the answer as a selection criteria as part of your decision to recruit that person, because that can amount to indirect discrimination. So you've got to think about why you're asking the question. What are you looking to draw out from that answer? In a nursery environment, it sounds like a fairly sensible question to ask, and I'd probably take an angle of, do you apply your childcare experiences at home with the role that we're looking for? How would you behave here that you might behave with your own children? But you've got to be a bit careful. It can be a bit loaded. But most of all, if you're going to ask the question, don't use the answer just to single out people for a would get the job, won't get the job. Does that make sense for you? Yeah. Yeah.
James, hopefully, again, that helps. Press away if you want more on that. Great, thanks, James. So question for you, another question, and then I'm going to hand over in a mo to Fareed. Is a verbal offer legally binding? So let's say I get through the process and it works well, you want to take me on. Do you think that a verbal offer to me, a verbal employment offer, is legally binding? Tell me yes or no. Great, yeah, good, good. Good, okay, interesting.
I may go completely wrong here, but from what I remember, as part of the Chartered Accountancy qualification, we had a basics of law, and I remember that any contract, even if it is a verbal offer, but that wasn't about the recruitment, but I guess it's the same. It was like verbal offer is also legally binding. So, yeah, maybe I just remember something wrong, but
yeah. Well, interesting and controversial because you've gone against our guests, but you are absolutely right. So a verbal offer is legally binding, and as Fareed says, that's because it's enshrined in contract law. You do not have to provide an offer in writing. It's a funny area. It's an area, and interestingly, almost because people are clearly not barristers and lawyers, so won't necessarily have picked up on this, but oftentimes in real terms, I've seen offers given and then rescinded verbally. The point to just be aware of here, without scaremongering and almost putting you in a position where you never want to recruit again, is that you just need to be aware that you are creating a contract. It is legally considered a contract. So use your language in a way that doesn't tie you into something that you can't back out of. And often you then find that that's where people then tend to want to go more to the written offer. And Alexi sort of alludes to that well in your comment there, Alexi. It's one person's word against another, and it absolutely is. And I keep saying, this is a kind of theoretical nth degree situation. So the way to avoid that, as you say, Alexi, is that you should make your offers in writing, because also beyond the legal situation that it creates, it can become very confusing for candidate and employer if everything is verbally agreed. So best to do it in writing and then have conversations after if there's any amendments that needs to follow. Quick shout out there again. Thanks, Alexi. Should we record all interviews? Should we record all interviews, audio or audio or video? I wouldn't recommend recording interviews because it takes you into the GDPR realms, and that in itself becomes a little more complicated. So unless you've got good reason, I wouldn't recommend recording them.
Thanks, David. Another question that I will probably struggle to answer, but I'm sure you can help. In my previous interviews, I was too nice and friendly to all candidates. With time, I realized that I need to find a balance between friendly atmosphere and leadership power, as I've seen that people were motivated but responsible because of my friendly behavior. Do you have any advice?
Interesting, but I've seen that people were motivated but not responsible. So I think
I guess I'm personally struggling to understand advice regarding what specifically.
Yeah. Let me try and answer this, and hopefully then the participant can refine us if we're not getting it. It's really, really important at an interview that you are yourself, because ultimately you're representing your business. Okay, within the confines of needing to be always professional, with no element of discrimination, you have to be present and you have to be yourself, because if you're not, then the person that you take on finds someone different ultimately when they arrive and start working for you. So I would always advise that you have to be who you are. Leadership power is an interesting, one. I wouldn't assert that you would want to assert your authority in an interview situation, because that can be a turn off for candidates. I personally think to that comment that a friendly atmosphere is actually a good thing. It would indicate to me, if I was coming to be interviewed there, that it was a good culture and one I'd probably want to join. So
yeah, I agree.
Be great to just get the person that made that comment just to tap in and say whether that's we've interpreted that right. We have a question from Alexi. Can you hire people you had dated or known in the past? Great question. I mean, the short HR answer is, yeah, you can. Nothing is enshrined in the law that says you can't. My question to you would be, would you want an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend working for you? And which in itself opens up a hugely, massively interesting debate. Not one that we'll start here, but maybe one to think about. Okay, so just finally from me then, onboarding. So you've gone through all of these great processes. You've got your kind of yourself in a good place. You've got the right candidate. Just a plug here really to make sure that you remember that the recruitment and selection process doesn't end when you make the offer. It's as important that you carry through with onboarding and that you've got a good plan for the individual and they feel like they've made the right decision. So on that note, I've taken far too long of Fareed's airtime. So I'm going to show you this quickly, which is the summary of the right and wrong, and then I'm going to pass over to Fareed.
Thank you very much, David. So we'll just go through the finance and tax applications. Let's say you found that right person and you're going to have your first hire. What do you need to have in place? So you need to register as an employer, and we'll cover that in a second, and obtain an insurance and set up a pension scheme. And let's dive into each of them separately. So as first step, registering as employer with HMRC. You usually that means you have a limited company in the UK, but you don't need to have one. If you are a sole trader, you can also register as an employer with HMRC. Once you apply for registration, which is not something massively difficult, and I mean, I would recommend you speaking to your accountant, and they can help you with that. And so as a result, you will get a letter from HMRC confirming you're registered, and you will get two numbers. You will have employer reference number and accounts office reference. Employer reference number is the one you'll need to put to the payslips when you send out to employees. Accounts office reference is the one that you need to quote as a reference when you make a payment to HMRC when you make the PAYE payment. And once you've got them in place, you can run payroll. So, and these two numbers also, you will need that to send the payroll information to HMRC. Otherwise, they will simply not accept that. And can we get another one? And employment liability insurance. So one of the questions we asked by our clients, do I need to have an insurance in place? Different insurances like public liability insurance sometimes could be indemnity insurance, and are great things to have in place. But as such, unless your regulator or supervisory body within your industry specifically requests for that, there is no need. The one that is mandatory is employment liability insurance. So if you are hiring someone, you need to have that in place. So please make sure you've got that covered before you hire your first employee. And it's obvious there are different levels, etc. But as such, it's nothing. It shouldn't be expensive. I would say the ones that I've seen, the most of the employment liability insurance I've seen would be around within £100 per annum limit. So if you get the bill for £1,000, maybe it's worth reconsidering. The next one, please. Thank you. And the next one is pension scheme. So you don't need to have pension scheme if you are the only employee or if you've got another person who is a director who is an employee. Also, you don't need to have that in place if you've got people who are working part-time and don't earn more than threshold, which is around 8,000. But if you have, in most of the cases, if you're hiring your first employee, you need to have a pension scheme in place. You can choose. You're free to choose the provider, the pension provider, and you can see on the screen one of the most popular ones. Probably the most popular one I've seen in practice is would be NEST, which stands for National Employment Saving Trust, and it is the one that is backed by government, and it is the one that will come with the minimum costs. And also the NEST is you would get the money by default would be invested in very low risk investments, so there won't be any great return, but at the same time you understand that your employees will be in the pension scheme with the very low risk investments.
Very good question on that.
Yeah.
So you need to enroll employees and they have to opt out proactively, as we know. Does the director need to opt in the pension scheme right away before they can opt out when they are on the payroll?
Directors. If I have a pension scheme and if I am a director, I don't even need to. I'm automatically exempt, so I don't even have to opt in myself. So I don't need to enroll myself or another director to the pension scheme. So directors are exempt unless they don't. So there are exceptions for directors, but by default, the directors are exempt from enrolling. One thing that will be few other things that will be worth mentioning about the pension and auto enrollment. And I guess that's where HR also comes. You cannot, when you hire someone, that you have to automatically enroll that person, and that person will, whether they want to stay or get out of the pension scheme. I've seen in the practice, which is illegal to go and to talk to employee and asking them to opt out from that pension scheme. So please bear that in mind. You have a postponement. You can postpone the enrollment of employee to the pension scheme for 3 months. So most of the time employers are choosing to go for that option because you will have 3 months of probationary period. But at the same time, when you do that, you need to send this information to employee. And again, if employee still wants to get enrolled within these 3 months, they can do that. So they will just need to specifically request for that. I can see that there's a question. You have to enroll employees and they have to opt out proactively. Does the director need to opt in the pension scheme right away? Oh, yeah, sorry. I guess that's the question you asked. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, the tax implications. So when you make a hiring decision, you are asking the question, okay, me as an employer, how much I'm going to spend on that an employee. There are, as you know, there's often there's a confusion. Okay, there will be income tax. We need to deduct employees' NI and pension. And so for you as an employer to make your life easier and calculations easier, think of the gross income, gross salary. So gross salary of employee, whatever you've agreed within the employment contract is your base cost. So on top of that, as you can see in this slide, the extra costs, you have employers NI. And employers national insurance is, I wouldn't say it's very easy to calculate, but it's you're getting the gross salary, you're deducting a threshold for NI, which is let's say roughly £8,500, and whatever amount you've got on top of that threshold. Let's say the salary is 28,500, and the first 8,500 is covered by threshold. So you have to pay national insurance on 20,000 that is on top of that threshold, and the percentage is 13.8%. So you need to factor that one in when you're offering the employment. And another one is employer's pension, and right now it is 3% by employer, but again there is a threshold. Roughly speaking, it's just about £6,000. Let's just say £6,000 per annum. So first £6,000 of gross salary is not you're not paying any pension. Whatever is above until it reaches another threshold, 50K, that's you need to add 3% pension on top. So other things, income tax, employees NI, employees pension, yeah, these are the things that you as an employer need to pay as well to HMRC, but they're all deducted from gross salary. So employee gets just net salary, and not the amount that you're putting in the employment contract, and all other deductions are coming to you, and it's your responsibility to make a payment to HMRC. So we as your accountants, we're adding up all this income tax, employees national insurance, employees pension, and on top we're adding employers NI, employers pension, and you get this one kind of bill that you need to pay to HMRC after the month end. So we have support from UK government. I just wanted to run through the employment allowance. The first one is the support that's always been in place, and it's still in the place. It's nothing to do with the pandemic. So that employer's national insurance we discussed a minute ago, 13.8%. You may not necessarily need to pay that if it's your first employee. Why? Because first £4,000 per annum, you get allowance called employment allowance. So whatever your bill is for the national insurance, employer's national insurance, if it's, let's say, 2,000, you don't need to pay that. If it's 5,000, first 4K is not paid. You're just paying additional £1,000. So you can treat this as an incentive from government to hire people, and when you have the first employee, it doesn't hit you that much with taxes. Another one is Kickstart Scheme. It's a relatively new scheme. It was announced in July, and it started in November. It's the scheme where you can hire people from 16 to 24 years old who are currently on benefits right now and on a universal credit, and they will come from government. So you can advertise this within the government government will send you the candidates and you can hire them for 6 months, and the salary, all the taxes, etc., will be covered by government within 6 months. So as long as obviously it is within national minimum wage, you are free to pay more if you want, but they will cover only national minimum wage. And it's up to 25 hours a week. You can hire them, and again, if you want to hire for longer hours, no problem at all. But the more hours you hire, whatever you hire more than 25 hours, that will need to be covered by you rather than government. And also in the Kickstart scheme, you get £1,500 per person that you hire as a setup fee for additional allowance from the government. They understand that you need to train these people, you may need to buy a laptop, etc. So this £1,500 is there to cover it. The last one is apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is it's been in place for a long time. It's just that right now there are additional benefits of having apprentices in your firm. You get, depending on the age, you get from £1,000 to £2,000 allowance from government as like a bonus payment. But what is the apprenticeship is that normally, and it depends on the industry, depends on what person will do, but by default you hire a person 4 days a week. He or she works for you in the company. 1 day a week they go to college to study towards the qualification within your industry. And the wonderful thing about it is that the government pays most of the tuition fees, and we're talking about 95% of the fees covered by the government, and it is during the whole tuition. So this could be, and usually we're talking about 3 years qualification. So that's a wonderful incentive from the government. And if you think, yeah, I mean, some employers may say, well, I will lose 1 day out of the whole week, but at the same time, you are training your members of staff, and government pays for it. So if you believe in that candidate and you would like to go long term, that could be something to watch out.
Barry, we have a question.
Yeah.
So does the amount stated in the job advert usually include employees' pension, or is the amount excluding employees' pension?
It is excluding, so it's only gross salary, and you are adding pension on top, and you are adding the employer's NI on top. I mean, it's not right to include the pension just because that person can always opt out from the pension, and also different companies have got different pension schemes in place. What some companies do, for example, instead of offering minimum 3%, they may offer 5%, 6%, 7%. If that's the case, so you're giving additional incentive to employees, yeah, you can just mention that in the advertisement.
Great. And second question we have is, when does the Kickstart scheme start? So
officially it's been launched on the 1st of November, but because it's a huge scheme and it's brand new by government, it takes a very long time to process applications. So if you are a small business owner, if you hire less than 30 people, you need to find a representative who will do this on your behalf. So who will apply on your behalf. They will gather applications from different employers and apply in one go for at least 30 applications. And that application, before it reaches government, before government considers that application and comes back with the questions and the whole process, and we've witnessed it because we're helping employers as well. And it's very, very long, and it can take, from the day of application, it can take somewhere up to 3 months before you have you can hire someone. So yeah, you have to be patient, and I'm sure that the procedures will just get much quicker in the future. But right now we're seeing big delays. Right, just very quickly about us. So Q Accountants, we're dealing with small businesses and startups. Our core service is
that's mine.
Oh, that's yours. But go. I'm like, I don't remember anything about insurance. Go for it, David.
It was fun to see if you could sell my business, which I know you do well anyway. But yeah, it's probably not unsurprising that we provide a range of services from being retained on a monthly basis through to things like one-off projects. We do a lot of work in the recruitment and training space. So after this lunch and learn, I'll reach out to you separately and share what we can do for you.
And it's we have relatively similar business model that we have retained service, where and most of our clients are on the retain, and we call it all-inclusive package, where they get everything covered from bookkeeping to taxation, and they get the fixed fee on a monthly basis. And sometimes we have customers who will just come to us for help to deal with annual accounts, tax return. The cash flow forecasting has been popular request recently because of the CBILS loan applications that businesses can get. Yeah, I guess if you've got any questions, and I know we encourage you to ask the questions during the webinar, and thanks very much for doing that. But if you've got any other questions, you can ask within the next minute or so. And here you are, our details. Please feel free to reach. Okay, so I've got a question asking, can you summarize the benefits of employing a person? Our experience of doing this was pretty bad and expensive, and it was hard to see the benefit over employing freelancers in terms of risk to our business. So I will leave the benefit side with David, but one thing I wanted to highlight is about the risks of not hiring that employee. So if you take someone on board, and if that person works for you full time, then and if you treat that person as a freelancer, i.e. that person is sole trader or limited company and issues you the invoices, they are likely to be caught by so-called IR35 rules that are in place by HMRC, and they're getting stricter and stricter. But basically, what does that mean? HMRC's view is, look, this person works for you the similar way as other people would do. They come to the office. Obviously, it's exceptional times now, but they have a desk. They have your email address with your business domain. You supervise them, and they need to ask for your approval if they want to go for holidays, etc. And so, therefore, that's not really a freelancer, but that should be treated as your employee, and they can retrospectively ask to pay additional taxes and some penalties to do with that, because from taxation point of view, by hiring someone as a full-time employee, it is more expensive than just having a freelancer and paying them. Basically, you don't pay employers national insurance, so and you don't pay employers pension contributions. So for you as an employer, if we just forget about everything from taxation point of view, it's much more beneficial to have freelancer. You're right, but then HMRC's view is, look, looks like you have an employee in place, therefore please pay NI, and that person will also need to pay employees NI. And so yeah, that's a big risk from my side. Would you mention any benefits of having employee rather than freelancer, David?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with your comments there. The benefit, to keep it brief, is that you create much more what I call stickiness, where you've got an employee, because there's a sense of ownership and involvement. That person has skin in the game because they're being paid a salary, and may also be looking to progress within the company or learn a new skill the company, you know, in the area the company trades in. In theory, although it's not always the case now, but freelancers will not have that investment. They will want to just do a job and get out and earn the more advantageous day rate. So that is, you know, in simple terms, would be my view. Yeah.
And I guess maybe with if you have a permanent employee, there will be notice periods, and that notice period applies to both sides, right? So you don't, and if, I guess freelancer can just leave the same day or the tomorrow, whereas employees contractually bound to give you notice, and so that you can find time to replace that person.
I think I would just say that there's also there's pros and cons for both. One's not better than the other. As I said at the start of the presentation, that is a consideration up front when you're thinking about what you need from a resourcing perspective. And sometimes contractors are the right answer to that in the short term, until you build up more momentum to then employ your first employee.
Yeah, looks like there are no questions, and again, if there are any, please let us know. And thanks everyone for joining, and you're welcome. I'm sure we will run more sessions with David very soon.
Thanks everybody.
See you later.